there are books that have come out over the years as part of the thousands of books written on this subject that accuse the Secret Service of all sorts of things, from negligence all the way up to actual complicity in the shooting. Does that make you angry?
I can't get angry. It's like upsetting. The only thing that's upsetting to me is, I say, the individuals that weren't there or weren't around that weekend. I don't know how somebody all of a sudden, who maybe was born in the 80s or whatever, has become the authority on everything. Granted, they can study, they can do all the research they want, and they can know more than anybody else about the assassination. But to me, that it doesn't give them the right to accuse or make assumptions if they weren't there.
You kept a pretty low profile even after.
Hello, this is author Vince Palamara, and this is a streamlined version of a video that I just posted on YouTube. That one was entitled, "These Are the Real Men That Killed Kennedy." Well, this one reflects my upcoming 7th book coming out in 2025 entitled, "President Kennedy Should Have Survived Dallas." First item of business, multi-story building rooftops were normally guarded during presidential motorcades. Yes, you heard that right. Multi-story building rooftops were normally guarded during parade routes. This went back to the FDR, Truman, Eisenhower, and Kennedy era. In fact, when President Kennedy visited Tampa, Florida 4 days before Dallas, all multi-story building rooftops were guarded with heavily armed members of the Sheriff's Department and the military. And they were there to obviously guard building rooftops and anything that they could see. It's one of the major reasons why President Kennedy survived Tampa, and for that point, many other trips before.
For firing the shot. It's most unusual, incidentally, that such a thing could happen because of the unusually tight security measures that are ordinarily taken by the Secret Service who guard the president. And normally, any vantage point, a rooftop, and windows which command a parade route are carefully scrutinized and carefully guarded, and men are usually posted on rooftops along a parade route, particularly if there is any reason at all to suppose that there might be someone in the area who would have such ideas as assassination in his mind regarding the president. These precautions, of course, are taken by the Secret Service for all presidents, as they have been for many years.
Another item of business. Not always, but usually agents were on or near the rear of the presidential limousine, beside or behind President Kennedy. In fact, there's quite a few motorcades where agents are indeed stationed on the back of the car, as they were 4 days before Dallas and Tampa. And allegedly, President Kennedy ordered the agents off the car for Dallas. There's no truth to that whatsoever. Special Agent Charge Gerald Bain, his #1 assistant, who was Floyd Boring, one of the major shift leaders of the White House detail, Art Godfrey, Sam Kinney, and a host of other agents and White House aides told me that there was no truth to that. President Kennedy was a very nice man, never interfered with the actions of the Secret Service, and never ordered the agents off the car.
Supposedly Kennedy ordered the agents off the back of the limousine.
No, he had nothing to do with that. The record of history, that is false.
President Kennedy, very nice man, not difficult to protect, did not order the agents off the back of the car. Another major item, the Secret Service is the boss of the president, not the other way around. It's very understandable why people would assume the president was the boss of the Secret Service. After all, he's the leader of the free world, and these are just lowly Secret Service agents. But by law, the Secret Service, as Harry Truman said, the Secret Service was the only boss the President of the United States really had. That was also reflected by comments by Lyndon Johnson and Bill Clinton. So even if the president wanted to order the agents to do something or not do something, they were not to obey those orders, but were to politely do as they were told to do by their own agents and agency. So the president could order them even if they wanted to.
Well, he can tell you what he wants done, and he can tell you certain things, but that doesn't mean you have to do it. And what we used to do was always agree with the president, then we do what we felt was best anyway. Well, he can tell you what he wants done, and he can tell you certain things, but that doesn't mean you have to do it. And what we used to do was always agree with the president, then we do what we felt was best anyway.
The Secret Service, as Harry Truman said, the Secret Service was the only boss the President of the United States really had. That was also reflected by comments by Lyndon Johnson and Bill Clinton. So even if the president wanted to order the agents to do something or not do something, they were not to obey those orders, but were to politely do as they were told to do by their own agents and agency. So the president could order them even if they wanted to. Another major item is that the presidential limousine often had the bubble top on the car. Yeah, you heard that right. In fact, I discovered between a third and a half of all President Kennedy's motorcade had the bubble top on, often in bright, no rain, sunshiny days. And President Kennedy's smiling, this mythology, he didn't like the bubble top. Well, why was it on his motorcade, his limousine, at least a third to a half of all motorcades. And here I will present the footage to you now.
Hardly put in a busier weekend than this one in New York. First,
Another line of protection for the president that wasn't used was the limousine's bubble top.
The bubble top was a plexiglass covering that was put on the car, the presidential limousine. The conventional wisdom that it was bulletproof or bullet resistant. Turns out it was not bulletproof or bullet resistant in the standard way we think of that. However, it was a psychological deterrent because most people assumed it was bulletproof.
Popular belief has it that the limousine's bubble top was not used for two reasons. One, because what started as an overcast and dreary day turned sunny and clear.
The actual films and photos of several motorcades shows the bubble top on in the brightest weather conditions imaginable. So there's a myth that it was only on there for inclement weather. Not true. And the bottom line, what the bubble top would have done is it would have obscured an assassin's view via the sun's glare.
The second reason most often given as to why the bubble top had not been used is that the president had requested not to use it.
But I spoke to the agent who was the driver of the follow-up car, Sam Kinney. Sam Kinney adamantly on 3 different occasions told me that President Kennedy had nothing to do with it. It was solely his responsibility.
Supposedly, JFK said, I'm quoting now, get that goddamn bubble top off. Listen, that is not true.
And the President of the United States.
We arose that morning early to go out and prepare the cars because it was raining and we were trying to make a decision whether to leave the bubble top on or off.
Another major item is that normally a press photographer's flatbed truck, sometimes more than one of them, rode directly in front of the presidential limousine, taking still and motion photography, sometimes even including a live television feed, as was the case in San Diego and in Rome. So we wouldn't have needed amateurs like Abraham Zapruder, Orville Nix, Marie Muchmore, and others. We would have had professional eye and ear witnesses filming on high quality film and video and still photography.
Last Monday marked the 30th anniversary of the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Next, we take you to the campus of Southern Methodist University for a conference on what journalists remember of that fateful day. Panels include journalists who were in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963, as they discuss efforts by radio, television, and newspapers to stay on top of the story.
Before this thing developed, the Kennedy arrival, we assigned responsibilities to certain photographers. I personally had the president as my responsibility while he was in Dallas. We had, of course, other people at certain occasions. I was to get the arrival at Love Field and the parade and the luncheon. Those were my responsibility. And it is important that the president's pictures were my responsibility. So at Love, everything went fine up to the point that the whole day became great frustration for a photographic person. First thing, parades were usually handled with a flatbed truck for pool and certain selected photographic personnel to ride in front of the presidential car on presidential parades. That was canceled at the last minute. We were put in Chevrolet convertibles to ride several cars back. I think we were about 6 cars, Bob Jackson and I, and a couple of other boys were in this parade. And that put us totally out of the picture.
People had scattered. I think you were one of the people who was somewhat annoyed in the position that the press car was put in so far in the back.
Oh, quite. I was disappointed because it was customary. It had been customary in the past to put a flatbed truck in front of the president for a more or less pooled and selected newsmen. And Bob and I had been selected among other people. But at the last minute, they decided not to have that truck in case they wanted to get out fast. Figured it might be in the way.
Right. Do you remember who selected? Who did the
No, I surely don't. I imagine it was one of the Secret Service people.
The motorcade route was changed in Dallas. You heard that right. It's not a myth. It's not a misunderstanding. The special agent in charge of the White House detail, who was involved in the planning of the Texas trip, even though he wasn't there, Gerald Bain, told me that he was in an executive session during the House Select Committee era. It was the second major investigation of the assassination. Well, it's never been released. Even the ARRB never released what he said in executive session. But in 1992, he told me they asked him why the motorcade route was changed in Dallas. Mr. Bain told me, I know it was changed, but why? I've forgotten completely. I don't know. But the bottom line is, he confirms the motorcade route was changed in Dallas. If they would have been going straight down Main Street, such as Main to Industrial, the limousine would have been going at a much faster speed. It would have been away from the book depository and the grassy knoll.
The destruction of records is actually referenced in the Assassination Records Review Board final report. Very disappointing. They were records that related to trips that President Kennedy had taken in the fall of 1963 prior to him going to Dallas.
We're talking about the President of the United States. And I'm not a holier-than-thou guy.
And in the 1960s, I believe that we can demonstrate so that all the world will want to follow our example, that freedom and prosperity can move hand in hand. I express our thanks to you, and I can
Another major item is the special agent in charge, in this case Gerald Bain, and his direct assistant, in this case Floyd Boring, always accompanied the president when he left Washington, D.C., obviously during presidential motorcades. In fact, all the films and photos I discovered through the years, through the decades, had either Bain, Boring, or both of them on motorcades. As far as I could tell, this was the first major trip where Roy Kellerman, a third stringer, went on his own, yes, to Dallas, a city that President Kennedy was warned not to travel to by Senator Fulbright and others. Roy Kellerman being a third stringer, this is like going to the Super Bowl, right? Have your starting quarterback or the backup, having a third stringer go in there and lead these men. And I think that's one of the reasons why Roy Kellerman was usurped of his authority and why, just things went haywire. Another major item is the Secret Service was much aware, of prior threats to President Kennedy's life before Dallas, especially in Chicago and in Florida. And yet nothing was actioned in Dallas to reflect those threats. I believe the assassination of President Kennedy was a moving crime, and the advance agents and the brass should have let the agents on the ground know of these mortal threats to the president's life. They admitted they knew of them, and yet no special precautions were taken in Dallas. If anything, security was even more lax than normal.
And you'll seldom meet a motorcycle man like Russell Groover. At 76, he's seen them all.
I've ridden motorcycles since I was 12 years old and entered into every competition you could think of.
But Groover has one story of his biggest challenge. When he was a Tampa motorcycle police officer in November 1963.
We knew that President Kennedy was coming, and there had been rumors around the department that there had been a lot of threats on his life and everything.
When the president arrived in Tampa, Groover was assigned to ride the motorcycle closest to Kennedy.
They're putting the President of the United States' life in my hands, more or less, is the way I accepted that.
There were rumblings.
Apparently the CIA and FBI and so forth had inside information that Tampa would be the place that they would try an assassination.
To make contact with the crowd.
An old documentary shows President Kennedy smiling in Tampa.
Keeping in mind that the local police, the sheriff's department, and the military worked in concert with the Secret Service, who controlled the whole matter of security on motorcades, while the military and the sheriff's department were stood down in Dallas. Famously, Deputy Sheriff Roger Craig admitted on film in 1975 that the sheriff's department took no part whatsoever in security, and that Sheriff Decker told these men not to participate in any way in the presidential motorcade. And yet the day before, in documents, as I discovered in my first book, Decker told Dallas Secret Service Agent 4 Sorrells that he would have an augment of extra men to help with the motorcade, and yet he did not help in the security. The military was stood down. The day before, the 112th Military Intelligence Unit worked hand in glove in San Antonio, and yet they weren't officially there in Dallas, but unofficially James Powell and others were in Dealey Plaza.
Roger Dean Craig, former Dallas County Deputy Sheriff, winner of the Man of the Year Award in 1960 for law enforcement in recognition of outstanding performance in the line of duty. Where were you on the day of the assassination of John Kennedy?
I was standing out in front of the sheriff's office, which at that time was at 505 Main Street. They've moved it since then, but it was at 505 Main Street, directly in front of the front door.
Was the motorcade passing that area at that time?
No, we had to wait about 15 minutes before the motorcade arrived, but the sheriff had sent us out there that early to wait.
Were you merely a spectator, or were you on duty?
Well, no, I was on duty, but a couple hours before Kennedy was to arrive, the sheriff called us in, what I call the street people, the plainclothesmen, the detectives, and he instructed us that we were to stand out in front and in no way take part in the security of that motorcade, that we were merely spectators and nothing more.
Did that seem unusual to you?
It did to me at the time, because there were so many people around and so few Dallas police officers. This is one of the first things I noticed, was the lack of Dallas police officers. Try to keep the people back.
Another major item, normally local police and local detectives had a car in the motorcade. Dallas Chief Jesse Curry and Head of Homicide Will Fritz wanted cars in the motorcade behind the Secret Service follow-up car with heavily armed men, but the Secret Service took them out of the motorcade. Another major item, overpasses were not guarded in Dallas as they normally should have been. Yes, that's to prevent anyone from throwing anything off an overpass or obviously shooting the president from an overpass. Those overpasses should have been guarded. There should have been no spectators on any overpass. 9 agents drank the morning of the assassination, including 4 that rode on the follow-up car: Clint Hill, Jack Reedy, Paul Landis, and Glenn Bennett. This was grounds for removal of the Secret Service, as drinking while in travel status was a big no-no. Yet these men were not punished in any way whatsoever. They continued on in the Secret Service. In fact, Clint Hill was even awarded a medal and a promotion. In fact, actually 2 major promotions. But yes, those men drank in the morning, and I think that's why their reflexes were terrible. Sleep deprivation and alcohol are very bad no-nos for reflexes. Uniquely in Dallas, JFK and LBJ, yes, the president and the vice president, were in an open motorcade together. This was highly unusual. Sam Kinney even admitted as such, so did Abraham Bolden and others. In fact, the House Select Committee lead attorney for the Secret Service area, Belford Lawson, said this was the first time in history. Well, I tell you what, I looked at all other motorcades and I never saw those two together in an open motorcade. The only other time they did was also in Dallas, September 11th, 1960, when President Kennedy, who was not president yet, he was a senator, and Senator Johnson traveled through Dealey Plaza, albeit through the opposite way on Main Street. But the bottom line is, they did this as candidates in 1960. The next time they rode together in a motorcade was Dallas, November 22nd, 1963. A major smoking gun in the case: fake or unauthorized Secret Service agents in Dealey Plaza. Fake, meaning that most people think that they might have been CIA agents or, assassins. Could it have been they were real Secret Service agents? They were unauthorized. They were there unofficially. But several people, credible people, ran into men claimed to be Secret Service agents that had a badge. One of them was Dallas police officer Joe Marshall Smith. Who were these men?
And there already was evidence suggesting there was a second gunman firing from the grassy knoll.
There's numerous people running up the hill alongside Elm Street, there by the Simmons Freeway. Several police officers are rushing.
From the moment the president was killed, many eyewitnesses testified that they believed there was a man with a gun on the grassy knoll. One eyewitness was Malcolm Summers, who reenacted his experience for Nova.
After the motor van had passed, I waited about a minute, and then I came running over across to the knoll. But when I got here, I was stopped by a person in a suit with an overcoat over his arm, thrown over his arm. Also had a gun under his arm. It looked like a little machine gun to me, a small machine gun.
Malcolm Summers was one of several eyewitnesses, including at least one Dallas policeman, who ran into people claiming to be federal officials and who were never found. Chief Counsel for the House Assassination Committee, Robert Blakey.
A careful examination of where all of the Secret Service agents were that day and their duty assignments indicates that no Secret Service agent was in that area.
Another eyewitness, Skinny Holland, watched from this overpass. Josiah Thompson interviewed Holland for his book.
He said that he and 6 or 7 of his fellows also saw some puffs of smoke come out from under the bushes near a stockade fence on the grassy knoll. This meant so much to them that they ran right over there as soon as the shooting was over. About 15 feet down from the corner, he found some fresh footprints, some cigarette butts, indications that somebody had been there.
Police officer Joe Smith also ran up the hill in pursuit of a suspect. The crowds followed Officer Smith running toward the elusive gunman spotted on the grassy knoll.
I ran across the Elm Street to run up there toward that knoll. It was, and we were stopped by a man in a suit, and he had a overcoat on his over his arm, and I saw a gun under that overcoat. And his comment was, don't y'all come up here any further, you could get shot or killed, one of those words.
A man wearing a suit was sighted behind the picket fence at the top of the knoll. He was quickly apprehended by Officer Smith.
Stop right where you are. Don't you move now. What you doing here?
Gentlemen. United States Secret Service.
Okay, partner.
It's all right.
A few months later, they told me they didn't have an FBI man in that area. If they didn't have anybody, it's a good question who it was.
A House Select Committee conducted the last thorough investigation of the John F. Kennedy assassination. This is where the committee believed a second gunman would have stood. Some eyewitness accounts and acoustical evidence agree that at least one bullet was fired from this spot.
Another major smoking gun is the death of Secret Service driver Thomas B. Shipman, October 14th, 1963 at Camp David. We all know about the many mysterious deaths after the assassination. This is one a month before. If driver Shipman would have lived, I think he would have drove Kennedy in Dallas. That's what his surviving family told me. He died very unexpectedly. He had no heart ailments or nothing, but he died of an alleged heart attack at Camp David. First person to ever die at Camp David. And that allowed Bill Greer to drive Kennedy and Nepali in Dallas.
Another major discovery of mine. One of two main drivers of JFK's limousine, Secret Service agent Tom Shipman, passed away suddenly of an alleged heart attack at, of all places, Camp David on October 14th, 1963. So this man died before the assassination of a heart attack at Camp David. And again, I explore this more. I have a whole chapter in my next book. I spoke to family members of the late Shipman. And don't do it way about this time. They said that he was quickly buried, and he was urged to be buried quickly. There was no toxicology reports. It was like a country doctor, heart attack, there you go. 2 days later, he's buried. He's a fit Secret Service agent. In fact, he said his widow was surprised he just passed his annual physical, and he's dead of a heart attack. And what does that mean? Thomas Shipman was one of the two main drivers. Sam Kennedy was an auxiliary driver, usually drove the fall car. Well, Bill Greer is left to drive JFK in Dallas.
And finds expression in mutual warmth and respect.
With people who had waited hours to see the president, the man dedicated to the defense of peace and freedom.
My three major Secret Service suspects are driver William Greer, shift leader Emory Roberts, the agent who was in charge of the other agents of the follow-up car directly behind Kennedy, and Floyd Boring, who was the planner of the Texas trip from the Secret Service's point of view.